and welcome to today's Knowledge at Noon event. My name is Jonathan Henry. I'm your host for today, and today's topic is Knowledge at Noon, navigating social impact careers in a changing world. So, my guests for today, and we're going to switch over, and I'm going to pin them now just to make sure everybody is visible. So here we go. I have my guests for today, and they will introduce themselves. But I have John Tribus. He is faculty. He is also Georgetown here with our Center for Social Impact Communication, and Lisa Andrews, our Director of Integrated Career Development, and our special guest today, Alyssa Platt. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn over today's Knowledge at Noon to our guests here, especially John. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jonathan. And hello, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to hear what we have to say and hopefully what you have to say as well. We're really honored for your time today. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm Dr. John Tribus. I am the director of our Center for Social Impact Communication. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a moment, as well as a professor. And we're talking about social impact careers today. So I've got to tell you a little bit more about my career journey. I've been at Georgetown just about 11 years already. Prior to that, I was working directly within the social impact sector, but my path has been a winding one, really with the desire to experience and serve the sector in a number of different ways. I got my way, started my career in the most fantastic way possible, and that was working for Dr. Jane Goodall, the world's foremost authority on chimpanzees. I'm just back from Tanzania, where we celebrated the 65th anniversary of the start of her research. But I worked with Jane and the Jane Goodall Institute, a nonprofit, for a number of years, really supporting her global tour in particular. She travels 300 days per year perpetually. After working with Jane and the nonprofit, I decided that it was time to become a consultant and to utilize my expertise in social impact in a different sort of way. So I became a consultant at a large agency within a social innovation practice. So I continued to work with nonprofit organizations, but also expanded the reach, working with foundations and socially responsible businesses. And then my last stop prior to Georgetown was working in government service, was working at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. as a strategist, a locally engaged staff member. So with my Chicago accent, people who would answer the phone and hear that I was calling from the British Embassy would be very disappointed when I didn't have that beautiful British accent. But that's a little bit more about my career journey. But Lisa, if I may hand it over to you next.
Thank you so much, John. I can't compete with any of that. I will just say I am, as Jonathan mentioned, Director of Integrated Career Services here at Georgetown's School of Continuing Studies, and also a graduate of the Certificate in Social Impact Storytelling, which did have a big impact on my practice, even as a career development professional and as an active volunteer in the social impact sector, specifically with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So the certificate definitely had a huge impact on my career, my life, and will certainly that will bear fruit as as I go forward into the future as well. I'm confident of that. So again, thank you all for being here. I will pass it to Alyssa, who will introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Platt. I'm a fundraising and communication professional, currently looking for my next opportunity, hence one of the reasons why I'm on this panel. But I'm also an alum of the Public Relations and Corporate Communications Master's Degree Program at the Georgetown School for Continuing Studies, and had the privilege of having Professor Tribus as my professor a few years ago. And I've been in fundraising throughout my career, and specifically over the last few years have focused on donor stewardship and donor communications.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Lisa. So here's our agenda for today. We, of course, want to make it as interactive as possible, so we'll be monitoring the chat with any questions that you have. But also just join the conversation. It doesn't always have to be questions, especially as we're thinking about what is this current state of careers within the social impact sector. There's a lot going on. to say the least. So please feel free to utilize the chat as we go. We're going to start in just a moment with, I want to share with you 6 trend lines in social impact careers to consider. These are by no means the be all and end all. There's not just 6. These are just 6 that I think are particularly important that I'm seeing right now as a professor of social impact at the university, what I'm hearing from students, alums, the sector. So there are things that I wanted to share with you to kind of consider the larger picture as to how we're operating right now. Secondly, we're going to hear a little bit more from Alyssa of some job searching insights from the front lines, a little bit more as to how her job search process has gone and what she's learned along the way. She's learned a lot. I've had the privilege of knowing Alyssa for a number of years now, and she's, amongst other things, a really great connector and thinker of different ways in which to approach things. So I really wanted her to be joining us today. Then we'll turn to some recommendations. What does this all mean? Recommendations for social impact career success. And then we'll leave time for, again, discussion and questions. So I wanted, before we get into those different items, I wanted to start with kind of a big question, and that is, what is social impact? I think if you're in this webinar already, you've probably got a good sense, but it's one of the things within all of the different programs that I teach that I like to start with, because there's not a universal answer to what is social impact. And I think exploring that a little bit more also is kind of an undergirding principle as we think about what is the evolution of careers within the sector as well. So the social impact sector is really blurry. That's the word within the Center for Social Impact Communication that we like to use. That there's not just, again, this one way in which to think about it, that it's not this linear sort of way, and that there's a lot of ways in which the sector is now blurring. Not so far past, this is how it used to be. We used to think about the 3 legs of the social impact stool, if you will. So, of course, nonprofits are always known as part of the social impact sector, but also government, thinking about governmental funding. And then what was kind of the wild inclusion a number of years ago, especially thinking about the contributions from Billy Shore, who is the founder of Share Our Strength, was the role of business, of thinking about that as the 3rd leg of the stool. As we think about it now, if only it were this simple, there's more legs of the stool today as we think about social movements, as we think about the inclusion of foundations and other aspects of the philanthropic sector. It's now in the foundations, it's now not even traditional foundations. It's thinking about different ways in which we're exploring social impact. So this is another way in which kind of a visual way to think about it. I've worked with one of our designers at the university, and this too is not the be-all and end-all of the visuals, but we were trying to explore how can we try to explain what social impact is and how it's evolving. So first we start with some of the words up top, right? This term is a broad one, but the belief that social impact can come to life in many different sorts of ways. But the ultimate goal being the improvement in the social condition of both individuals and society as a whole. But then as the visual is trying to show, beyond those 3 legs of the stool, there's now so many different organizational players, and there's so many different topic areas and ways in which social impact comes to life. And the list is rather endless because the challenges facing society, not just in the United States, but around the world, are quite tremendous. So as we think about social impact from conservation issues, as we think about it from justice, equity, inclusion, diversity sort of lens, as we think about it from education. So kind of social impact now goes up and down and side to side and all the way in which around. So even as we kind of try to get our minds around social impact, I encourage you to think about it in this wider, blurry sort of sense. This is the work that we do at the Center for Social Impact Communication that I lead at Georgetown. If you're not familiar with us, I encourage you to take a look at our website. We're a research and action center dedicated to the belief that social impact is advanced when head and heart unite. We're very much a strengths-based organization that's doing research, but also doing what I call the 3 C's. So we offer a number of certificate programs for professional ongoing learning. We do a lot of community engagement where we're connecting with organizations, not just in the DC area, but around the world, connecting them to community engaged learning opportunities and service learning with our students at all different levels. And then convenings, things like this, tapping into bringing people together to discuss really important things that are going on right now. In terms of our certificates, we offer 4 currently, and we're always developing new topic areas. So we have a certificate in social impact branding, a certificate in social impact consulting, a certificate in social impact partnerships, and a certificate in social impact storytelling. So Lisa, as you were mentioning during your introduction, you're an alum of that program as well. So all of these programs are running in the fall. So you see the specific dates on the side of the screen. We can always talk more about these programs if they're of interest. But these are programs that we're really always trying to focus on topics that are not just important right now, but we feel like they have lasting power. And not only educating, but really, again, bringing community together through like cohort-based models where we're developing really expertise together and encouraging a lot of growth as we think about the sector jointly. So let's get to those 6 trends. Now that we've thought about social impact a little bit more, what are 6 trend lines within the sector and specifically focused on careers to consider? And I'd love to have feedback in the chat, certainly as we go along, because again, these are not the be all and end all. I don't want to share these with you and give the impression that these are the only things that are happening right now, but I think they're a good place to start the conversation. The first trend is one that you're probably already aware of and talking a lot about, and that's that the current climate is really tough. I hate to say, but there's almost not a day that goes by that I'm not connecting to a current student or an alum or even just a friend working in the sector where they're telling me something that's happening right now that's really making the work challenging in general, but also why it's evolving so quickly. And then from a career standpoint as to if you're in the space of looking for a new job, why it really is so challenging right now. And of course, a lot of that is because of government action or inaction and the current political climate, which is really creating this ripple effect of uncertainty within all aspects of the social impact sector. So what we're seeing, of course, is that government funding in a lot of directions is either ending or being diminished. And that has the ripple effect of nonprofits having to find funding from other sources or more expectations on the philanthropic aspect of our sector, foundations, donors really picking up the slack, if you will. And so, of course, what this means from a career perspective is that you've got to be more patient and adaptable than ever before. But also that the social impact sector has arguably never been more important as we think about really protecting civil society, not just in the United States, but around the world. And here are some headlines, right? Here's one that came out just a few weeks ago from the Associated Press. The government was once a steady partner for nonprofits, and that's changing. This is also a quote that you see below it that I pulled from a recent application to one of our certificate programs, and it really encapsulates a lot of what's going on, and it kind of broke my heart, I got to be honest with you. She said, I am in the throes of what former USAID ideas call the International Development Job Hunger Games. So just as we think about USAID in particular, what that is also then doing is people who no longer have these positions are flooding the market in other sorts of directions, which means that people looking for jobs and social impact, any of the ways in which we talked, have made it harder than ever before. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. The second trend that I wanted to highlight is that the social impact sector is increasingly blurry, right? And that provides opportunities as well as challenges. So that goes back to what I mentioned before, and that we really need to define then as individuals, what does social impact mean to us? And how do we individually want to work within it if we are in the throes of some sort of career transition in the moment? And then also acknowledge that you may cross aspects of the sector as well as topic areas. that, as I shared my introduction, that's been my experience. I was not just focused on one aspect of the sector, but really going between different aspects of the sector with time. So where are you falling, right, within this blurry aspect of the sector? Or if you've always been fixated on your career transition trajectory on one aspect, if you're in this transition phase, are you somewhere else within this wide social impact ecosystem, the blurry lines of social impact? The third trend is that words change, as we know, but commitments to equity and equality are still vital. So we know that the social impact sector in particular is in this transformative state of how do we even talk about integrating equitable practices into operations from an organizational standpoint. But we also know that movements such as trust-based philanthropy and others, at the same time, they are still on the rise as we think about that equity-centered sort of focus of our work. So while the words may be evolving right now, we need to think about how do we describe the work that we do and that commitment to equity, both in that individual lens and that organizational lens in different sort of ways. I've had a lot of conversations. In fact, one that was last week with a nonprofit that gets a lot of its funding from the government that is needing to scrub the language of diversity, equity, inclusion, but is still thinking about how do they have that, if not from those words, but from that true values-oriented sense. So as we trickle that down to the career level, we need to think about how do we evolve language, but still having the commitment to the values as we go forward. The fourth trend for us to consider is that proof of impact really matter, and it matters more than ever before. So the sector is increasingly, no matter, right, if it's a nonprofit, a foundation, a social impact, a social movement rather, is that increasingly focused on how do we showcase impact at that organizational level and then through an individual level, such as through a resume, right, in a job search perspective. But there's a lot of ways to do that. We need to have those data-driven sort of impact sort of things, but also how do we use stories to show not just outputs, right, with our work, but also outcomes. And by doing that, we can show different sort of narratives of how we've been involved in different social impact. So for example, we can highlight and really dial up the narrative as to not just what was the result of our work, but how did we go about doing the work through aspects like co-creation? And what was the value of that as we think about a career transition? That's important as well. Here's the fifth trend for us to consider, is that the rise of entrepreneurial gig roles, right, and second or even third careers really is happening right now within our sector too. And this gives me a lot of hope, is that a lot of people now are opting into freelance or contract-based work. I think we especially saw that taking off, of course, with the COVID pandemic, but it seems to be evolving in an additional direction right now as well, where people, maybe especially who are more advanced in their careers, they're realizing I have all of this knowledge that I can now use, especially more in a consulting capacity, or being a part-time executive or a part-time executive director within an organization. I've seen more of that, or as a interim executive director within an organization. But also just more of this spirit of kind of an entrepreneurial sort of role of coming into the sector in different sorts of capacities. And that also can be advantageous to the social impact organization. Maybe that means that they're having somebody like you who has a very, very important subject matter expertise, and maybe they are not needing to give as many aspects of service in terms of back to the employee of a full-time employee as opposed to a part-time. So what this trend is really getting at is that there's just more ways in which we can be working in the social impact sector right now. And then lastly is hopefully a reminder, and that's that using social impact experience comes in a lot of different sort of directions. So I think especially as we're creating resumes or updating them, It's so typical, right, to go to the typical experience from a job as well as what is our educational background. But I've seen more and more resumes who are focusing on lived experience and how is that helping with a transition. Or volunteer. I saw one resume the other day that was specifically labeling it as volunteer leadership as a section in the resume, or board service. What we're also seeing is that there's more micro-credentialing need, and that's really what we're doing a lot of and offering through our certificate programs at Georgetown. We do offer full degree programs elsewhere at the university, but that's where the certificate programs come into play, whether it be our social impact certificates or the wider portfolio of certificates is really going deeper into one area where you might need to do a little bit more work on. So this is all value, right? If we start to get our mindset away from what is just the typical areas of expertise, we really have useful social impact experience that we can be dialing up from a lot of different directions. So hopefully some food for thought, maybe some reminders, maybe more ways in which to think about it. But I'd love to ask Lisa and Alyssa, as you hear me talk about some of these six that I've picked up on, which one of these really dial up to the surface in your experience, in your conversations, or have we missed any that we need to really highlight?
Well, I would say this most recent trend is definitely something to pay attention to, that you are more than just what you get paid to do. People are multidimensional, and to not discount. I have to tell people, put this on your resume. You're hiding things from me. Why didn't you tell me you were a board chair at your favorite charity or something like that? Or these hours of service you put into volunteer work at various organizations, that is experience, whether it's paid or not, is immaterial. It's direct experience in the field, and all of that can create stories that you can tell in an interview situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be something you were paid to do.
Mhm.
Yes, I agree with all of these trends. I think um, one looking at the government trend with all those people who are unfortunately losing their jobs right now is definitely prevalent. Even though I'm unemployed right now, I'm also helping friends who are let go from the government update their resumes to pivot to more social impact types of jobs. Um, in my own experience, I'm also continuing to find ways to make myself stand out in applications. I've added through the recommendation of a former boss, like interests. So I include like plant mom, Lego builder, comedy improviser. And actually, in an interview last week, where I was trying to show that I could pivot from being in-house to being a consultant, the question I got was how can you manage, multiple clients when you've been in-house your whole career? And I talked about having done improv for the past 6.5 years, and I'm able to, one, it helps me with active listening, but also helps me being able to jump from task to task pretty quickly because in improv you have to remember not only your character deal and who you are, but also that of the people on stage with you. So yes, don't discount the lived experience, volunteer and board service.
And
And I would
Alyssa,
add also, if I could, to go back to the government issue, because this is definitely top of mind for me as well. I've been dealing with a lot of people who were RIFT, a reduction in force. Many of them came from USAID, and John, you talked about that. And one interesting thing that I've been hearing is, Lisa, you're telling me to do all this networking. What do I do when my network collapsed?
mhm.
Everyone, as you mentioned, the Hunger Games of jobs. I'd never heard of it stated that way, but that's very quite accurate, actually. We're all competing for the same thing. And where do I network when my whole network is basically job searching now or has collapsed? And to that, I say, you're not necessarily all competing for the same thing. When you really try to get down to it and clarify where you're going, there is a lot of there variety among, or there was a lot of variety among the USAID job focuses that you can translate into potential opportunities in the private sector, nonprofit sector, social impact sector as well. So it may seem as though you don't necessarily have a network, but you really do if you're looking forward to what your next opportunity might be. And that's something I'm going to touch on a little bit in my portion of the presentation.
And Lisa, I think is a good reminder, is we need to be working on our network. It sounds so obvious, I get it, but we always need to be working on our network, not just unfortunately when something so awful like that is happening,
Mm-hmm.
how do we carve out time when we are fully employed so we can be having those conversations? I try to do that as much as possible, right?
Hmm. For sure.
Yes, through a coffee or a Zoom, um, because it also is just really good listening and
Hmm.
picking up and relationship building. That old adage, don't just reach out when you need something, is a good
Exactly.
reminder.
Exactly. It's not just people who are in your space now, but who was in your space 10 years ago, 15 years ago. These are all still people who are part of your network, whether or not you've been in touch with them for a while, they're still there. And you can always go back to them as well. It's not just who you currently know or who you want to know by virtue of a professional association or something like that, but who did you know in the past? And then who do they know as well? So it's not just who you know, it's who they know.
And Alyssa, you mentioned improv. Lisa, if I may, I think you've done some improv as well. What's in the water with improv and job searching in particular? We need to learn from that, I think.
Is this
It's
my pitch?
interesting. You go ahead, Alyssa.
I was gonna say, is this my pitch to get everybody on the panel to do improv? No, I think it's just um I chose it as a hobby, but it's been so helpful when not only unemployment, but also just challenging things, throughout my career have presented themselves. And it's just a way to, instead of like come from a place of anger, come from a place of like curiosity and collaboration. And so I've just been able to use those skills from my like hobby that I do at night to my professional career.
And nothing is more of an experience of improv than an interview situation because you
This is
truly
true.
never know what question is coming at you. I don't care how many books you read on how to prepare for every possible interview question. You're on the spot, you're given a scenario or a question, and you have to respond right there on the spot. So you have to be able to draw on your experience and your knowledge to be able to communicate effectively and answer the question that was asked.
And
And,
maintain your composure.
And that as well. Yeah, not being
and
flipped.
and a good sense of humor across the board, right? Because job
That
searching
helps.
is not easy. Maybe we should do another webinar about utilizing some improv skills for the career search as well.
That would be fun.
So let's go a little bit deeper. Alyssa, I wanted to hear from you a little bit more next, if we could, because you've had a lot of transitions recently. And so you've seen firsthand as to what is happening. And I know it's hard to paint a one size fits all, sort of thing, but you are seeing a lot of things within the job searching process, the good, bad, and ugly, if you will. What are you seeing? What kind of sticks out as you think about your career search and the reflections about, what's happening against those trends?
Yeah. So I should preface this by saying this is my second time being unemployed. I unfortunately was let go in May of last year due to a reorganization at a previous organization. So I don't consider myself an expert on unemployment, but going into this second time due to loss at my most recent organization due to loss of federal grants and financial challenges, I knew the infrastructure I needed to set up for myself so I didn't lose my mind. Not to say that I haven't been successful in that, but nevertheless, I think this time around, especially in the DC metro area, it feels particularly saturated from people losing their jobs, not only in the government sectors, USAID, but also in the nonprofit spaces as the ripple effect of executive orders and the current administration come down to us. I found that from being on LinkedIn a lot, that organizations are getting hundreds more applications than they previously have. And I think that introduces the ATS and AI component of job application screenings and the turnover for if you make it in or if you're not, and the keywords you have to include in your resume. Um, and the other thing that I found is that um, being able to network and draw from not only people who I've spoken to recently, but even from Georgetown and my undergrad alma mater, American University, have been really helpful throughout my job search. Um, I think having informational interviews and networking meetings have been really invaluable to me. Um, for example, I am ex casting a wide net for my next job opportunity. I'm exploring both in-house fundraising and communication opportunities, but also consulting opportunities for fundraising and public relations firms. And I think with both um, sectors, there are biases for and against my background, and so it's just been a unique challenge to continue reinventing or reframing my skills as a generalist, as a fundraiser, when I'm talking to somebody who may not necessarily understand the fundraising lingo and things like that.
Hmm. And Alyssa, what are you seeing in terms of uh, if you are able to get that first interview? What have been some of the kind of trends within that? I know that, sometimes you were talking as it's hard even to get to the hiring manager as a first round, and sometimes it's so hard to get to, when you get the first round as somebody who even knows the ins and outs of the role itself. Do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, yes. I've been lucky that I'm getting interviews, so that's good. Something I've seen is that the first round interview is typically an HR screening with an internal or external recruiter. And the questions they ask are pretty standard. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want this job? What about this job drew you to apply? And then it touches on some of the skills required for the job. And then they talk, make sure that you're okay with the compensation and the benefits, and they explain the benefits and everything. From my experience, I found that um, I have questions about the role specifically and about the team to better understand the organization and the culture to which I may be stepping into. And the HR person may not have those answers. And so it's always important for me to remind myself that I'm also evaluating them as they're evaluating me. And so my invitation to HR recruiters is to understand the job description a little bit better, but also to like take my questions, step away, and go respond to them. I think would be really wonderful. But I think also from what I've one example I can provide is there was an internal HR screen that happened, and one question they asked was the job requires that you supervise a team of people, and I don't have direct report supervision experience. I've project managed um, multiple high-level projects with a variety of people, but I don't have that direct report experience. And so while I was reframing my response to say that, the HR person said, "But you've never had any direct reports," and I had to say no. So I think I wish I unfortunately didn't make it to the next round, but I wish in that instance that they saw that they may not have seen the binary of like yes or no, but rather the foundation of that skill set is there, and my desire to learn and grow as a manager, as a people manager, was present, and I think with like a little bit of investment from the organization. So I've also seen a little bit of that binary with like you either have the skill set that we think you have or you don't. And so with every interview I have, it's always about making sure I try to find the line, which almost feels like it's a moving target of like saying you have the experience, but not too much experience, but just enough experience for what they're looking for.
Yeah. The Goldilocks, right? Too hot, too cold, hard to be just right.
Yeah.
Um, Alyssa, you've also done a number of different strategies that you've shared with me in the past that have seemed to have worked for you quite well as to keep as a positive attitude as you go through the career transitions. What have some of those things been? And you've also really focused on community building.
Yes. I think when I was first unemployed, I didn't realize how big my network was. And then when I was starting the process of looking for a job, so many kind people came out of the woodwork. One thing that I've done more so this time around than the first time is having those networking meetings, even if the organization isn't hiring, because they are always looking for great talent and will keep your resume and application on file, especially for smaller shops. I've seen to be the case. And then for me, as I'm looking to pivot into consulting, just asking the question every single time is like, what skill set do you think I should highlight, or how should I talk about my in-house experience as I'm trying to make this transition? And some answers have been great. Some answers have left something to be desired, but I've been able to piece together some lovely responses as I'm continuing to refine my answer to how do you stay organized when you're trying to work with like a variety of different clients. Um, Other tactics that I've done to stay sane is I deleted the LinkedIn app from my phone and only use LinkedIn as a browser. Probably still use it too much, but it's helpful for me to stay on top of trends, but also to see who within my network is hiring, and also just looking into different companies that I may not have been familiar with before. Um, I've had some really wonderful networking meetings from just cold outreach to people, but then also some lovely introductions from people within my network who've introduced me to people who work at that particular company. I hate asking for help, and that takes a lot of work for me to do. But it's paid dividends, and I'm hoping that it's how I land my next job. And then the third thing that has helped me keep me sane is remembering that my job isn't my identity and my personality, that there are other facets of my life that I need to care about, specifically my mental health. Um, Last summer, I just watched my mental health tank, and luckily I found a great career coach and therapist, but I didn't realize how my identity was tied to my job once I didn't have a job anymore. And so this summer, I've been really taking advantage of saying yes to things that sound fun. I'm also getting married in under 3 weeks, so that has taken up some of my brain space. Um, but thinking about like who are the people in my life who I care about, like spending time with my fiance, going to the outdoor movie with a friend, um, taking, taking a class, and reading a book, like going outside and reading a book when it's not a million degrees outside, have really been beneficial to me. And I guess specifically like taking breaks, which again, if you couldn't tell, I'm not great at doing. So last week I took 2 days off from the job search, and it was really helpful to just try not to think about job searching and let my mind wander. And I sat by the Georgetown waterfront, and it was really lovely.
That's nice. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for sharing those um, strategies. Really, really helpful, I think, for people to hear that. I think as I hear you talk, and I've talked to others, it's so much not just about what are these strategies, but that mindset shift as you're doing it as well. So, if it works for those listening, instead of, networking or cold calls, I like to think of it personally as like a listening tour almost, of having that ability then to hopefully set up and connect with others, whether you know them or not, and also just kind of take it in. What are people telling you, and how are they not just connections to that organization, but also as knowledge? So what I've also seen people do, alums of our programs, is if they're in this space of a transition, is they might also be writing some articles. Like I know folks who have published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review or Chronicle of Philanthropy, and you know, kind of doing the make lemonade out of lemon sort of mentality, just to get that sort of different aspect of what's happening going on. So I think those are really, really good ideas.
Yes, and that also reminded me, I've also been providing like pro bono, like nonprofit support. So I'm on the board for an Open Book Foundation, which is a really great local DC nonprofit. Actually, my clients while in Professor Travis's class a couple years ago. So relationships matter, as you can see. And I've been doing some pro bono support for them this summer, developing a peer-to-peer fundraising guide that they and helping like streamline that language and messaging. I've also been helping my fellow friends and just like contacts who've come my way who are unemployed with resume review and career services. I got laid off in May, and starting in January, I posted to my LinkedIn that I was able to help people look for jobs and do resume and cover letter review and other career service help, like a pep talk. And so I've still been doing that. I actually just reviewed somebody's resume the other day, who's also looking for their next opportunity. And so that's really helped keep me going of like, how can I keep my skills sharp during this time when I don't have full-time employment?
It's it's a really important, this I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but from nonprofit NGOs, we know all the big ones, but the vast majority in the United States are smaller nonprofits that need this sort of assistance. So as we go back to that trend, and Alyssa, what you're doing with an Open Book Foundation is, how can we provide to really worthy organizations in this mutually beneficial sort of way of providing services, and then maybe expand our capabilities going forward. How about AI? Have you been utilizing artificial intelligence at all within your search?
A little bit, and I have to say, it feels like cheating, like ChatGPT, because I've been in the workforce a little over 9 years, and it's just like popped into the scene recently. So I will say it feels like cheating, but yes, I use it. Um, but I don't want it to overcompensate for like my own like writing and like my own voice for how I write my resumes and cover letters and whatnot. So what I've been doing is I'll upload. I have multiple versions of my resumes for different industries that I'm currently applying for. And what I'll do is I'll upload like the template of that resume and then into ChatGPT, copy the link for the job description and just say like, how does this align? Like what areas for improvement are necessary? And sometimes ChatGPT is right, and sometimes it messes things up because it's a robot after all. Um, but it has helped me like with the language rephrasing because as much of as a communicator as I am, I've looked at my resume 12 billion times. And so when it's nice to get ChatGPT's perspective, it's also helpful to send it to other people in my network to say, what are the blind spots? Like, how can this be improved? And it's been really beneficial as I've updated my resume. Same goes for cover letter writing. Highlighting the keywords from job descriptions are really helpful to get through like the ATS, AI, HR processes that happen for a variety of organizations. And then also, when I do get to the interview stage of jobs, I'll also put in the job description and say, like, give me interview questions. And that's been helpful in my preparation. I know, for example, I had to do a skills assessment for one job. And so I put in the skills assessment in my responses. And then I said, what questions could they ask me based on this? So that was really helpful for preparing.
Mhm. And we've got about 14 minutes left, and we want to get to other questions or just even thoughts or reactions. I always encourage that. So if you want to, I know we may have some questions in the chat already, but feel free to add more or just things that are on your mind as we're talking. But Lisa, if I may go to you next, you wanted to highlight some other thoughts for career success.
Thank you, John. And Alyssa, just quickly, I want to say I appreciate you saying your job is not your identity. I know I was laid off 11 years ago now, and that was the first thing I thought, who am I now? I don't have what I feel like I was put on the earth to do anymore. So what does that mean? So that's a really important kind of question to grapple with in your own life.
And I would
Um,
argue, Lisa, especially in the social impact sector,
well, yeah,
that increases, right? Because we're doing some form of mission-based work. So it's
right.
so hard to, for a lot of us to get rid of that, idea or to have a both and. It's part of my identity, but not my only identity. So I think, we have a particularly hard time, those of us who are working in the social impact sector.
Yeah, it's really a passion. So it's hard to separate yourself from that. And also that your employment status is not a judgment on your character as
Right.
well.
That's right.
So, but here's what I want to briefly say, because I do want to get to our questions, is that when you're thinking about a transition to really any space, but especially when it comes to social impact, really sort of narrow down because I hear a lot of people say, I want to help people. Don't we all? But that's too big of an umbrella. So I want you to think about two questions. These are Lisa's two questions. I will drop them in the chat as well. Um, the first one is, what questions do you want to answer for the world? And the second question is, what problems do you want to solve for the world or help solve for the world? And once you have taken some time to journal or vision board, draw about it, think about it, then the next step is who in the world is already answering these questions, who is already working on these problems or helping to solve these problems, and how can I join them? That will really help you focus your own interests, your own passions, and then provide kind of a roadmap for where to go next. And by the way, if you can't find anyone who's doing these things, congratulations, you're an entrepreneur.
Mm.
So that's kind of another step to think about as well. Once you do all of that, you want to do, so you'll have a list of places to explore. You really want to think about what your unique value proposition is. This is kind of an old 80s term from, from business really, but it can really help you to tell your own story, especially if you're making a career transition. How does your past influence what can be done in the future? Because that's what employers are wondering it is whether past experience can be repeated in the future for them. So Alyssa talked about, well, she didn't have direct supervisor experience, but she did supervise a project. So the skills are the same. It's just a different context. So figuring out the answer to those two questions. And from that, what is your unique value proposition? What could you bring to the table? How are you looking at these problems and questions in a unique way that you can then contribute to those organizations or to your own successful venture? Knowing if you are making a career transition, if you're not, if you're going to, different organizations, this doesn't necessarily apply unless you want to move up. Upskilling might be something you need to do and a productive way to spend your time as well. So gaining a certificate, even some, Coursera classes, LinkedIn Learning, that kind of thing, expanding your knowledge, expanding your skill base so that you have even more to offer to potential organizations. So I'll end it there. Um, and I think we're going to move to the Q&A at this point. Um,
Sounds good. Lisa, are you able to see them on your end? I'm having trouble seeing the chat on my end.
Yes, I can see them. Okay, so let me, and I notice here Jonathan has dropped in all of the links to our certificates that may benefit you if you're looking to do some upskilling. So those links are all in the chat. Also, Alyssa, I want to point out you've been getting some kudos for all of the things that you said and the ways in which you have expressed your own vulnerability, which is much appreciated
Thank you.
in this space. Maybe all of us could talk about this. Sarah's asking, curious what areas in the ecosystem are more apt to hire paid freelancers, consultants, for example, corporate social responsibility, nonprofits, foundations. Alyssa, you mentioned doing some pro bono work. What are your thoughts, or John, what are your thoughts on getting paid to be a consultant and doing that? I know, John, you were a consultant at one point.
Most certainly was. And, the basis of this question actually is why we created our certificate in social impact consulting,
There you
which
go.
which runs once per year and is next offered in the fall. So, that program is for people again who have subject matter expertise in whatever aspect of social impact, but they want to make that into some sort of entrepreneurial venture, right? It could be you're already working in a different larger agency or firm, but it is a lot of people in particular come into that because they want to start their own consulting practice. So it's just a little bit of context, but if I may answer it in a slightly different way, which I hope is
Sure.
helpful, what I'm seeing in social impact consulting is that there's more of a business opportunity for independent or freelance consultants as opposed to going to consulting agencies. So somebody who is, independent or collaborating with one or two individuals that is a particular niche within the social impact sector. Like, for example, they're really experts, let's use a fundraising example, as in planned giving. So then they become like the go-to for planned giving. And then they're able to be hired more by a variety of organizations because they are that go-to. So what we're seeing, especially with nonprofit clients, right, with perhaps smaller budgets and more project-based work, is that their work is more oriented towards independent consultants as opposed to agencies. When I was an agency-based consultant, the economic model didn't warrant, I hate to say, working with a lot of nonprofits because they were smaller projects. So in the last 10 years, and especially since COVID and now everything that's happening, on the political conversation side of things, there's more of a business opportunity for independent consultants. So I hope that's helpful as kind of a different way in which, if I may, to think about the Sarah, the question that you've asked. But I think that there's opportunities across nonprofits, foundations, and socially responsible businesses. I would just argue that it's probably a little bit easier to get a foot in the door of a nonprofit or to start with a smaller project, paid project first, and then to utilize that as an opportunity to showcase how good you are with your expertise and then get a larger project from that organization or to tap into that organization's other ecosystem of contacts. So then if you're working for a nonprofit, say, hopefully you can get some recommendations maybe for some of their corporate partners or some of their foundation funders. So there's just kind of a different way in which to think about it. I don't know that I would say that one organization type is easier versus the other. Alyssa, as you're going through your journey, any thoughts
I
about
would
this?
I would have to agree. I've heard both sides of the argument of people who love consultants and people who don't like consultants and freelancers. And um, I think, and I mean, same for in-house folks like me. So I think it's challenging across the board. I think it's about having a really strong portfolio of work, excuse me, and then being able to have those people who you can go to provide references. down the road. And I think, yes, subject matter expertise is really important, whether it's on a particular um, industry sector like conservation or democracy or something like that, or a specific skill set like grant writing, um, project management, things like that. I've seen a lot of calls for grant writing. Um, uh, Positions within the nonprofit space. I think many nonprofits are scaling up on the major gifts, which is typically $25,000 or more and above. And then also with grant writing, I think those are the two areas I see the most jobs, which is great because they're trying to weather the storm that is the current um, climate of employment.
And as one person put in the chat, so many problems in the world today, hard to choose
I
one.
know.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
know.
The
Looks like,
reality is we
yeah.
have to also, though, have that intersectional, blurry mindset about social impact. So if you take just the issue of hunger, it's not just hunger, it's related to socioeconomic, perhaps mental health, right? So how do we also talk about our expertise, seeing the connections between all of
Mhm.
that, no matter what sort of job, consultant or corporate social responsibility or whatever? I think that's an important way in which to highlight your way in which to think too.
Few minutes, just a couple minutes we have left here. Gregory's asking about transitioning into a corporate social responsibility role, and if it's challenging to get hired directly into one from the start, whether you had to kind of start at a different place and work your way into that role. It seems to me that that role has been, organizations are kind of pulling back on that role. Am I accurate in saying that?
My what I'm seeing in my perspective is companies are calling this work a lot of different things.
Sure.
But that's the other thing to kind of be on the lookout, Gregory, as you consider a transition like that. It may not be called corporate social responsibility. Is
Mm,
it, some sort of aspect of corporate philanthropy? Is it, don't forget, volunteer and employee engagement is in the ecosystem of social responsibility. Some companies do not even call it anything that remotely seems social impact related. So my best recommendation, without knowing all your specifics, if I may, is cast like a wider net of what you're looking at even in like the keywords as to how is that particular company calling it. You may also find traction in smaller companies as opposed to going after like the Starbucks of the world or
right.
something like that is there's a lot of medium-sized companies or regionally based companies that are doing aspects of corporate social responsibility that may be the good foot in the door if you're trying to get there.
And to add on to what John said is that I would also try to look up people at the companies that you want to work for and reach out to them on LinkedIn, add them on LinkedIn, say, hey, I'm interested in this company for X, Y, and Z reasons. I would love to learn more about your professional journey to how you got this role. I'm interested in corporate social responsibility and hopefully they'll respond. I've done that a few times and it's been successful because one people love talking about themselves and hopefully I think in this um, climate of life people want to help other people. So that's my best advice to you. The other thing that I would recommend is getting involved with like professional societies that are targeted at corporate social responsibility. I know I'm on the board for the Association of Fundraising Professionals for the DC chapter. That's been really helpful in growing my network. I recently started attending the ComNet DC webinars and emailed the like info email and just said, "Hey, is there anybody from your leadership committee who I can talk to about like more about ComNet and getting involved?" And I had a lovely conversation with somebody, and I think some people on that leadership committee do corporate social responsibility, so that's something else to consider.
Well, we've come to the conclusion of our time together. We want to thank you so much for the opportunity to share an hour together. Hope that this was useful, gave you some new ideas and food for thought. As mentioned, we did share about our upcoming social impact certificate offerings. There's also a lot of discounts, whether you're a Georgetown alum or you've been impacted by the downsize in the federal government, there are tuition discounts. So I encourage you to learn more about those programs. And Lisa, your services are available to learners across these programs too.
Of course, and anyone that's prospective as well. So I did drop my calendar link in the chat. If you want to make a one-on-one appointment with me, happy to meet.
Well, at this point, then, thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. So this has been Knowledge at Noon today. And I do want to encourage you, check out the links in the chat. You'll get them as a follow-up as well. If we can help with any kind of jobs transition, please let us know. So with that, again, thank you so much. Any final words before we head out?
Thank you. Appreciate everybody.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.